There's this moment in Monster Hunter Wilds where the massive leviathan you're fighting suddenly stops attacking. It begins to coil up its body and make this weird noise that almost sounds like a dial or a timer. Wind tears through the arena and you realize that this creature is creating a small blizzard. But it's not directed at you. For some reason, this tempest of frigid air is going straight towards the monster. And then it clicks. You realize what it's about to do. This boss and the sequence both before and after it made me believe that Monster Hunter Wilds may be one of the best games I had ever played. Yet just a few short hours later, I would be met with something even better that would also confirm that the game wasn't yet complete. Monster Hunter Wilds is a game that has the potential to be not just the greatest Monster Hunter game, but one of the greatest video games ever made. I am in awe of the things that this game was able to accomplish, and I sincerely hope that with time, it will live up to its truly unmatched potential. However, as it stands right now, just going off of what we have in our hands as I write this script, Monster Hunter Wilds is unfinished, and somehow, it might still be a masterpiece. Wilds is not without its flaws. There are countless criticisms, misunderstandings, and genuinely valid concerns not just about the game, but the future of the series. Yet I believe there's something that most of the community has missed, an answer that can be found in an unexpected place that many have completely overlooked. Now, most people who played Monster Hunter Wilds did not fully understand it. As a result, there are a shocking amount of extremely common misconceptions about this game, and I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the people who believe or even accidentally spread these misconceptions. In fact, I myself have been guilty of doing so in the past, more times than I'd like to admit. I think the reason this happens so often is because Monster Hunter, despite its relatively simple premise, is an extremely complicated and nuanced game. And that's not a joke either. There are entire channels dedicated solely to breaking down how much damage the individual weapons and skills do. There are entire databases and applications you can use to sort through the colossal amounts of information in these games. And even once you do, the sheer quantity makes it near impossible to ensure that nothing will slip through the cracks, like high quality videos from channels you forget to subscribe to. This problem already existed a decade ago before World released, but now with millions of people playing these games at launch alone, expecting everyone to have absolute perfect and flawless knowledge of the series and its mechanics is nothing short of ridiculous. It just can't happen. I mean, just look at how many people Mandela affected an S onto the end of World after Wilds was announced. There is no S, it's just World, and despite that fact, there's still a 75% chance that I make that exact mistake at some point in this video. To make things even more complicated, these games receive updates and used to release on different platforms at different times. Let me give you an example. Without looking it up, how many monsters were in Monster Hunter World at launch? Assuming you played World, that is. 40? Maybe 25? Mid-30s? All of these answers are wrong because this is actually a trick question. See, at launch might make you think January 26th, 2018, but that was just for the PS4 and Xbox. On PC, where the majority of players lie, it was actually in August. Okay, big deal, how does that change the answer? Well, remember those updates I mentioned? In Monster Hunter World, there were 5 title updates that added 5 or 6 new monsters: Deviljho, Kulve-Taroth, Lunastra, Behemoth, and Leshen, with the or 6 being Ancient Leshen. Most of these updates came out before the PC version released, meaning the question how many monsters were in World at launch can't be answered. You need more information. At launch for PS4 is a different number than at launch for PC. Are you starting to get an idea of why it's practically impossible to completely stop the spread of misinformation in this series? Now, you may think this doesn't matter, but it's extremely important for 2 reasons. First is that one of the biggest points of contention with Monster Hunter Wilds is the roster. There's this idea that World had far more monsters than Wilds did at launch. I've even heard people say as many as 10 more monsters. Monsters are the central focus of the series if you couldn't already guess, so inflating that number by 30% is rather significant. But again, they're not doing this to bolster their anti-Wilds disinformation campaign. No, it's just a situation filled with complexity and nuance. Here's how those 5 monsters from before become over 10. In Wilds at launch, there were 2 monsters that you couldn't rematch. Equally, there are 3 variant monsters that are effectively just special versions of normal monsters with slightly altered movesets. Now, if I started World on PC at launch with those 4 extra monsters from the 8 months of updates, and I didn't count those 5 monsters from Wilds that you couldn't rematch or that were variants, then just like that, Wilds has not 29, but 24 monsters at launch to World's 34. But that doesn't represent reality. If we wanted to cut out clone monsters, we'd have to look at World's roster and do the same there. That means no Black Diablos, Azure Rathalos, or Pink Rathalos, Rathian, and if you're really strict about clones, you could also remove Levesioth, who's just Gyrototus but on fire, and Uragon, who's just Radobon but with rocks instead of bones. Now all of a sudden, when you remove all those updates and the clone monsters from World, there are only 25 monsters in the game. And if you're really stingy, you could stretch and say Zora's not technically a boss, bringing the count down to 24. But if I'm being honest, I don't like doing this, because the discussion of what is a clone monster and what actually counts as a boss fight are far beyond the scope of this video, and are far more subjective than something like how many bosses are in the video game. If you ask me, the answer I will give nearly 100% of the time is as follows. As of the writing of this script, 29 for Wilds and 30 for World. The second reason this is such a problem is because the Monster Hunter development team has been shown to listen to the fans. Don't believe me? Well, just look at Hitstop. This is something that World and Monster Hunter in general are famous for, but it was missing from the beta of Wilds. The developers themselves admitted that they didn't know how much people loved this feature, so upon hearing feedback, they reintroduced it. Weapon changes are another example. Once again, very recently, Insect Glaive lost its ability to do multiple vaults in the air. Fans gave feedback, and this too changed. Okay, but this is just beta stuff, right? They would never change a full game after release, right? In Iceborne, there was a terrible mechanic called tenderizing, which was so bad with light weapons that Capcom made a new skill just to fix it. You can even see this happening across multiple games. In Monster Hunter World, the community rightfully complained about mediocre weapon designs. The developers once again admitted that they didn't know how important this was to fans, and once again, they adjusted the games accordingly to make weapon designs in both Rise and Wild significantly better than those in World. So this idea that fan feedback is completely ignored just verifiably isn't true, and that's why preventing misinformation is so important. If the developers believe based on the response of the fans that there aren't enough monsters, they may overcorrect and focus on quantity instead of quality next time. I do not think this is likely, but consider this. There are ways to artificially inflate a roster. Instead of adding unique monsters like Lalabarina, New Udra, and Arkveld, you could just add 3 different flavors of Rathian. If the developers believe the most important thing is not the quality of the monsters, but the number on the roster, then they may choose to go down this path instead, filling the game with clones just to reach a quota. That may seem fine, but surely there exists a point where the amount of effort needed to make multiple clone monsters will equal the amount of effort needed to make one single original monster. Even if you assume a clone only takes 10%, if we inflate the next roster to 40 using a bunch of clones because 30 is nowhere near enough, then we may potentially miss out on one genuinely unique monster as a result. I personally don't have a problem with clone monsters, but if I were given a choice between 10 clones and one unique monster, I cannot imagine a world in which I'd choose the clones, and I think most people would agree with that. But in constantly saying that the roster that is, again, the same size as World, is suddenly too small, we're doing the same thing we did with weapon designs and hit stop and tenderizing. We're telling the developers where our priorities lie and what really matters to us. Now, to be clear, this is mostly paranoia. There are aspects of this series that the developers will obviously never compromise on. I mean, if we told them, actually, we don't like having 14 weapons, 14 is an ugly number, drop it to 3, they would probably say no. Equally, I'd imagine filling the roster with a bunch of clones just because the fans want more monsters probably wouldn't happen either, but I can't be 100% sure, and I would be lying if I said I didn't at least think about that from time to time. So there you go, enjoy that little bit of anxiety from my brain to yours. Anyway, that 10 plus clone roster would be a real shame too, considering this idea that Wilds has a weak base roster isn't just slightly incorrect, it's completely backwards. Monster Hunter Wilds has what may be the best starting roster of any modern Monster Hunter game, and it all comes down to variety. I know, we'll get there. The most impressive part of Monster Hunter Wilds roster to me is the quality. Generations Ultimate, the last old-gen Monster Hunter game, has 93 different monsters in it. That is an absurd number, but with that overwhelming quantity comes some instances of lower quality. Despite the criticisms it often received, I actually quite like Base World's roster, but it did have the problem of hosting far too many similar monsters. Granted, it had something that Wilds doesn't, but when you look at the roster and split it into categories, it's pretty dull. Wilds takes this idea of variety to a totally different level though. To demonstrate it, I've set up some numbers on screen. Each one has a monster from World hiding behind it. Choose any one you want. I've already got my monster, it's not on screen, so don't worry about picking the same one as me. Got it? Cool, let's flip the cards and see what you got. This is my monster, Legiana. It's one of the coolest monsters in the game. Okay, so here's the question. How similar is your monster to mine? Same body structure, similar element, does it fly? Depending on how generous you are, you could say as many as 9 of the monsters here are pretty similar to my own. Now let's run a slightly altered version of this same demonstration with Wilds. This time we'll flip it. Your goal is to select a monster as similar to the one I'm thinking of as possible. There's about a 3% chance that you just guess the exact same one, but there's no real way to avoid that. Anyway, give it a second. Got it? Great. I chose New Udra. How close were you? And what was your logic? I'm genuinely curious. I have some ideas, but I'd still like to know how you came to your conclusion. Regardless, statistically speaking, this would be much harder to guess than the option from World. Let's separate the monsters out into the categories like before so we can properly visualize this. The number of different categories here completely blows World out of the water. Can we just pause for a minute to appreciate Rise's roster though? I mean, it's got just as many categories as Wilds while having more monsters than both it and World. Okay, back to Wilds. What's truly impressive about Wilds though is not just the fact that we have frogs, birds, monkeys, leviathans, wyverns, squids, bugs, bears, fish. Where was I going with this? Right, variety. The impressive thing here is the variety within these classifications. Rompopolo and Camitris are both brute wyverns, and if you squint until your eyes are closed and then imagine two similar looking brute wyverns in your head, you can see how these two monsters really are quite similar. The regional variant of Blaziken is basically just a giant chicken. It's even got this goofy looking peck attack. Its primary game plan is to spread this flammable vapor across the field, then use its tail to both ignite and fan the resulting flames. Now compare this to Rompopolo, who, remember, is in the exact same category as Camitris. Rompopolo is maybe just the ugliest thing, like, in the world. It's got this long poisonous tongue that it can whip around the field and a fittingly long beak to match. On the other end of the monster, we've got this pointed tail that almost looks like a stinger. It'll occasionally stick this thing into the ground and send out air to create explosions around the field. It's able to do this through the use of pressurized air sacs around its body. Air sacs which, once damaged enough, can deflate, resulting in the monster adopting this sorry appearance. So again, close your eyes and these two monsters look practically identical. And remember, these are two monsters in the same category. When you go into different categories, the variation is astounding. But in spite of all of this variety, there's something missing here, and it's not insignificant either. With the exception of the monster you couldn't refight until the first title update, there wasn't a single Elder Dragon in the base game. This is the lowest amount of Elder Dragons we've ever seen in a mainline Monster Hunter game, even if you include Zoe. There are two important parts of this that we'll go in depth on right now, but first, I do want to be clear. I'm not defending the lack of Elders. I'm instead trying to understand it. With that out of the way, let's first go over why it might make sense to limit the inclusion of Elders. Oftentimes in games and even in life itself, scarcity increases significance. Fatalis is the perfect example of this. It is a normal looking dragon. In fact, the most normal looking dragon in the entire series. And yet, because it is the only normal looking dragon, it stands out. You know, I love how Iceborne chose to end on a normal Fatalis instead of giving us the full trio, because in doing so, Fatalis is allowed to stand alone as the absolute pinnacle of power in Monster Hunter World. It would feel way less impactful if you defeated Fatalis, the ultimate monster, and then suddenly the guild was like, oh, there's another one, but this time it's even more angry. And then you beat that one and they go, okay, this time it's the ultimate monster. It's Fatalis again, but it's old. And it's funny I say this because that's kinda what Worldborn already did. Now, I, like most Monster Hunter fans with a pulse, really like Elder Dragons, and Worldborn has the most out of any game in the series, but that title sort of doesn't mean much anymore because there are nearly 20 of them. There are only so many times I can hear, this dragon is going to destroy the world, it's even more powerful than the previous dragon that was going to destroy the world, before it starts to lose a bit of weight. Now, if my options are 20 Elders or 0, I'm choosing 20 every time. However, I do wish there was something more to that title, and perhaps that's the first reason why Elders have taken a back seat. I mean, the developers did say that they wanted to focus more on diverse environments this time around rather than the more Elder Dragon focused story of World. In doing this, they could create that grandiose feeling when encountering an Elder Dragon since there are so few of them. This brings us to the second big part of missing Elders. Let me ask you a weird question. Do Elder Dragons actually matter? I watched a ton of people play this game as I was making this video, and there was one monster that a sizable number of them had a very similar reaction to, myself included. Furthermore, a sentiment that often popped up online in general was, and if you check the monster's classification in the field guide, it's not. So then why did so many feel this way? I think it's because it gave off that same feeling you get when you're fighting a monster like Xeno'jiiva, Narwa, or Shigaru. That feeling that this fight is somehow on a different tier than everything else you've encountered up to this point. Elder Dragons are often described as walking natural disasters, calamity given form, a physical incarnation of the end of the world, and in a way, this monster does fit that description. So let's take a closer look at what is currently my second favorite monster in the game, the Colossal Ice Leviathan, Jindahad demonstrates why we may not need Elder Dragons. There was another monster in Generations Ultimate that did this as well, but the idea is that a fight does not need to be an Elder Dragon to have an outstanding spectacle. Crucially though, Jindahad is not simply an outstanding spectacle, but a mechanically solid fight as well. Up to this point, the biggest monster you've encountered was Uthduna, a whale-sized creature in the forest. Jindahad is more than twice the size, but if I may interject for a moment, I did think he'd be a bit bigger. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's huge, he's got nothing to be embarrassed about. He's way larger than average, average, if not a little thin. I mean, I guess it's just the way they were talking about him. I was expecting him to be...
Spoocer Legal has redacted the remainder of this bit. Please enjoy the rest of the video. We thank you for your continued support.
There are 3 different things that set this fight apart from a spectacle standpoint. First, due to the monster's size, it's fought in its own special arena, and as the fight progresses, it'll crash through the walls, forcing you to pursue it to the next stage. This gives a level of purpose to the monster's size, as it's so big that it's actively changing the area around it. This arena also further serves to set the monster apart from everything else you've encountered up to this point. This is Jin's arena. It's a monster so special that it gets its very own stage to fight on. The second reason the spectacle in this fight is so outstanding are the parts of the environment that both you and the monster can interact with. There's this tower over here that Jin will use to gain a huge advantage in the fight. It'll climb the tower and then sweep ice beams across the field while well out of the reach of the hunter, granting it a major boost in its offense while keeping it safe. However, you can use this to your advantage as well, thanks to the hunter in this game being, I don't know, a Viltrumite? Seriously, how are they doing this? Sorry, so when Jin fires these ice beams, it'll actually destabilize the structure. Get close enough and you can grab the tower with your hookshot and pull the entire structure down with one arm. Again, how are they doing this? Naturally, Jin will be sent toppling into the ground along with the structure, dealing a fair bit of damage on its own and creating an opening for you to deal even more. As insane as this is, I would be lying if I said it didn't add to the spectacle and general over-the-top feeling of this hunt. It's as though the monster is trying to gain some sort of advantage by running away and attacking from afar, only for you to almost literally grab it and drag it back into the fight. That's not the only thing you can dislodge from the upper parts of the battlefield though. The third and final reason why this spectacle is so outstanding is, of course, the Nova. The boss will suddenly stop attacking you and begin to coil up like a snake. As it does this, it'll draw in cold air, causing frigid wind to tear through the arena and creating a small blizzard. Spires of ice begin to sprout from the base of the monster, and when it's finally done charging, Do I have to explain why this is cool? You avoid this by grabbing one of these hanging chunks of ice from the ceiling of the arena and hiding behind it when the attack goes off. These are some of my favorite attacks in Monster Hunter, as they really go to show the almost godlike powers that some of these monsters possess. But what truly makes Monster Hunter's bosses so special is that regardless of how outstanding the spectacle of a given boss may be, oftentimes the mechanical aspect will be even better. What stands out in Jin's fight compared to a lot of other massive bosses in games is the level of interactivity involved. There's almost no waiting around in this encounter, with the exception of the phase transitions, the tower, and the Nova. Outside of those 3, you're pretty much swinging and dodging the whole time. The boss has large AoEs and ranged attacks to help highlight the fact that it's in a totally different league than the rest of the monsters before it. It'll charge straight at you, run up a wall, then use the momentum to come careening back down at terrifying speeds. You have to stay on your toes for most of this fight in a way that you really don't have to for true colossal bosses like Zora Magdaros or Lao Shanlung, as in those fights you'll sometimes spend minutes just waiting. Finally, there's the main gimmick that ties this whole fight together. The ridges on the monster's back are used to dispel heat and conjure up even more powerful blasts of ice. If you target these and manage to break all of them, you'll permanently disable the monster's Nova, leaving it without its most powerful attack. This not only promotes aggressive play, but it also rewards the player for noticing and targeting specific parts instead of just wildly swinging at whatever is in range. Overall, this is an excellent fight that's not only cinematic, dynamic, and exciting, but mechanically sound and meticulously crafted to ensure there's never a dull moment. It's one of the best hunts in the series, and I can think of plenty of Elders that are nowhere near this good. There are just some hunts in these games that, regardless of their title, will invoke certain feelings. So I think the question of is Jin Dahad an Elder Dragon is actually rather simple and can be answered with another question. If a normal monster can create a hunt that is as cinematic, as over the top, and mechanically exciting as this, does the title of Elder Dragon even matter? Do you see it? No? Exactly. This pitch black scene, completely devoid of light, is identical to what you'll see when you use today's sponsor, the Manta Sleep Mask. This is no ordinary sleep mask. It's not some cheap piece of cloth that you're throwing on your face in a fruitless attempt to cover your eyes as you sleep. No, the Manta Sleep Mask is different. I didn't understand why people used sleep masks in the past. I thought, wait, isn't this just what your eyelids do? Upon trying Mantas though, I finally saw it. Or I guess I didn't, considering the whole pitch black thing. I don't know, you get it. My biggest concern with things like this is always comfort, considering you are literally sleeping in the thing. But Manta's got that covered too with this super soft material that lines the mask around your eyes. You can even take these off and move them around to get the perfect fit. So do yourself a favor and click the link in the description to try the Manta Sleep Mask for yourself. You can even get a quick 10% discount using my code. Monster Hunter Wilds is more ambitious than it needed to be. It's clear now more than ever that Capcom wants this series to be more than about just hunting monsters. Ultimately, that remains the core and likely always will. However, Wilds aims to add context to that core, and whether or not it succeeded is going to vary pretty dramatically depending on who you ask. I personally believe that in some ways this is the uncontested greatest story we've ever seen in a Monster Hunter game, yet in an almost backwards way, for perhaps the very same reasons, it may be the worst. We'll begin with that first part. The story of Wilds is defined by 4 qualities. First is a living world. Of course, there's the wildlife and creatures that you can see roaming around, the monsters that come and go while following their own personal schedules and routines, and the fact that the seasons change as time passes. Even on the smaller scale, we've got herds of monsters and these little guys that look like they're straight out of Jurassic Park. But we see this same feeling and level of detail in the story itself. When you enter a new village, your party breaks off and does their own thing, as you're expected to do the same. When we first arrive in Kunafa, Nata and Alma head off to look at the sacred eggs, while Gemma, the blacksmith, goes to check out these blue stones. Even your Palico is playing with the children of the village. This whole place feels alive in a very different way than we've seen in the series prior. Next, there's a level of attention to detail here. If you're lucky and you catch her at the right time, or you're weird and you're just staring at her, you might see Alma pick up this statue on her desk and begin admiring it. She's a big fan of archaeology and is quite fond of relics from ancient civilizations. Later in the game, there's a scene where these creatures invade the camp and steal one of these relics, to which Alma naturally freaks out. The cool detail here is if you zoom in and enhance, this is actually the exact same relic that she was holding earlier. A much more significant example though are the wind chimes in Kunafa, which perfectly lead us into the third quality. Foreshadowing. It's said that these wind chimes are created from a monster that even Doshagama is afraid of, and it's how Kunafa village hasn't been flattened despite being in the middle of the monster-infested Windward Plains. Later we encounter the apex predator of this area, and wouldn't you know it, it's got those very same blue crystals. These 3 together make Kunafa village feel far more real. It's a village surrounded by monsters, yet they've adapted and learned how to survive by cleverly utilizing qualities of the apex predator here. More than anything though, the 4th and by far most important part of the narrative in Wilds are the moments. It's here that Wilds stands ahead of every other Monster Hunter game, and I don't even think it's close. Shortly after returning to your campsite in the forest, you find that the entire thing has been completely destroyed by a horde of Doshagamas. It's almost unsettling seeing this many monsters in one area, but what makes things even worse is the realization that this pack has formed around an alpha, giving them more confidence and by extension, making them far more dangerous. With this in mind, we rush back to Kunafa village to warn them, all while the wind is gradually picking up and getting more intense. The villagers are desperately preparing for the coming storm when we arrive. Unfortunately, we take far too long to convince them to stop and evacuate, since by the time they finally agree, it's too late. They're here. Easily tearing through the village, the pack is eventually let out by the hunter. The chaos continues outside of Kunafa, with the pack attacking a herd of herbivores, all while the storm grows ever stronger. We're eventually able to separate the alpha amidst the chaos, when the sand tide begins. A tidal wave of sand blankets the scene as the sky begins to rumble with the coming thunder. Suddenly, a pack of Balahara ambushes us and drags the Alpha Doshagama under the sand. I really struggle to think of even a single moment like this in the previous Monster Hunter games that I've played. Wilds itself has 6 of them, maybe 8? Monster Hunter has always told its story through the gameplay. You'd have a colossal monster like Lao Shan Lung that wouldn't be described to you or simply shown through a cutscene. You would instead be asked to just go out and fight the thing. Experience this walking mountain for yourself. And this is where things get complicated for the story of Wilds. Some people are going to love this, while just as many are going to be rolling their eyes and begging for it to stop so they can finally hunt the monsters. I love these moments in Wilds, I think they're phenomenal, and the depth of the story here is genuinely worth appreciating. The potential problem is that so much of this game is talking about hunting monsters instead of actually hunting monsters. Nata, arguably the main character if not for you, is probably the most divisive character in the game by far. People want to hunt monsters, not listen to this child crash out and try to fight a ghost dragon. And I think those grievances are totally reasonable, but a large part of why I love Monster Hunter so much is, ironically enough, the very same reason why so many fans of the series dislike newer entries. I love how ambitious these games are, how many risks they're willing to take. I'm glad they tried to make deep and compelling characters in a more in-depth narrative this time, and in some places it really did work. Quick spoiler warning for the 8-hour story that came out over a month ago. Zoshia is by far the most intriguing monster I've ever seen in the series. I so desperately want to know just what this thing is and why it was created. The chills I got as I fought this monster and watched it execute the very same attacks as nightmarish creatures like the Black Dragon Fatalis and the Archdemon Geismagorm were unlike anything I've ever experienced in this series. I want to know why a civilization would ever feel the need to create something so dangerous, what compelled them to do so, and why? Why on earth are its titles in the field guides Savior and Innocent? Is that how the people saw it before it lost its mind and wiped them out? Or a significantly more unnerving possibility, was this thing trying to protect them from something even worse? I've never been more curious about the lore and story of a Monster Hunter game than I am now. I absolutely love that they did this. I mean, it would have been so easy to just make Monster Hunter World, but again, to take the things that worked there and simply copy and expand upon them. Yet Wilds, much like Rise and Generations and even World, wasn't content with doing that. I do not think the story of Wilds is perfect. I don't even think it's close, but the sense of wonder, excitement, and genuine fascination it's been able to create is second to none next to the other titles in this series. Despite how positive I am about this story though, some believe that it makes one near unforgivable mistake that presents a terrifying possible future for this series. However, I do not believe this is cause for concern. It's not a mistake limited to the story though, so for that reason we'll toss it into a folder and come back to it when we have the necessary context. It has never been easier to use a weapon in Monster Hunter, and that's not to speak on the difficulty itself, which, believe me, we will get into. There's a lot to unpack there. However, for now, I'd like to look at one of the most interesting parts of the weapons in Wilds, the raised floor and the even higher ceiling. A large part of why it's nearly impossible to match Capcom and Monster Hunter when it comes to combat is the variety and depth of the weapons in the game. Most action games do not allow you to use multiple clearly distinct weapon types, and of those that do, I struggle to think of even one that reaches the level of depth found in Monster Hunter. Every single weapon has its own set of combos, abilities, specialties, goals, strengths, and weaknesses. I mean, even your movement speed is affected by the weapon you use. When you select a weapon in Monster Hunter, you are not merely selecting a method to deal damage, but the way in which you will interact with every encounter in the entire game. Wilds takes this a step in a new direction. It's something that while I have seen people mention, I've never seen anyone properly explain. So let's go deeper than the fact that the weapons are easier to learn and actually explain why. Combat in Monster Hunter is about three things. First is combos. You must understand the combos that your weapon is able to execute and the order of inputs needed to complete them. Second is positioning. Rolls in Monster Hunter are often used not to avoid attacks reactionarily, but preemptively. You generally shouldn't be reacting to things as much as you are preparing for them and ensuring that you're in the safest possible position. Third is commitment. You will get locked into certain animations, occasionally even for seconds at a time. You must attack while leaving yourself enough time to escape if necessary. All three of these have gradually decreased as the series has progressed in favor of a more streamlined and perhaps safe experience. We can see direct examples of this in the Lance. In Monster Hunter World, pressing triangle 3 times in a row would result in the default thrust combo. Pressing triangle any time after that would do nothing. In Wilds, this very same input does the very same combo, but with a new triple stab finisher on the 4th press. Now I understand this may seem pedantic, but here's where things get interesting. If you were to then press triangle again, you would get sent right back to the start of the combo. What? No, hold on, this is huge. Hear me out. This isn't just the case with the Lance. Looping combos like this are nothing new, but they've only become more frequent as the series has progressed. Now, there's an even higher chance that a new player will no longer need to memorize a combo to deal consistent damage. Where before mashing the same button would eventually lead them to a slow, clunky reset, now it loops directly into the next combo. But it doesn't stop here. No, far from it. Most weapons now allow you to move as you attack as well. And even those that don't have distance closers that, with the help of focus mode, allow you to be far more precise in where you attack. Remember, positioning is extremely important in these games. Compare these two combos with the Sword and Shield. In the first, Generations, I'm not moving anywhere. If the monster gets knocked down, I need to stop in the perfect spot to ensure that my entire combo lands. In Wilds, even if my positioning isn't perfect, I can just slide on over to where I want to be and finish my combo there without missing a beat. Finally, and this is my personal favorite example due to how clear it is, the level of commitment has been reduced. Take the Dual Blades. They have an attack called Demon Dance, and in both World and Wilds it looks like this. Did you notice the difference? It's in these flashes. In World and all other Monster Hunter games before Wilds, Demon Dance was an attack that locked you into one long animation that you couldn't dodge out of once it started. In Wilds, this same attack is broken up into multiple different parts. When you're in each of these parts, you're locked in, you can't stop. However, at the end of each part, you get to decide if you want to continue the combo or dodge away. This is why it's easier to learn weapons in Wilds than in previous games. Your looping combos ensure that you can always deal consistent damage without having to memorize anything. The movement while attacking ensures that you can worry less about your positioning and more about the weapon itself. And finally, the less committal nature prevents you from accidentally locking yourself into attacks that you probably shouldn't have used. You could argue it's a bad thing to make the weapons more accessible and that there should be a barrier to entry for each weapon. In fact, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I'd probably agree. But now, perhaps as a direct result of what happened in Wilds, I'm really glad that they decided to make these changes. In Wilds, I wanted to try out a new weapon, primarily because you can carry two at once. After much deliberation, I decided on a combination of Switch Axe and Lance, with the idea that one would provide pure offense and the other would be pure defense. That was incorrect. Little did I know, Lance is not a defensive weapon at all. No, see, most weapons in Wilds and Monster Hunter in general have to play in an almost turn-based way. You wait for the monster to attack, you dodge, you punish, and repeat. Lance, on the other hand, decides that it's not particularly fond of this playstyle, because with this weapon, it is literally always your turn. You attack, the monster tries to swing back, it does not work, you continue to attack. That is the Lance, and it is so much fun. It's almost a shame that so few people use this weapon, because once it clicks, there's nothing like it. I played this weapon here and there before Wilds, but never put a significant amount of time into it, and I think a large reason why I was able to fall in love with it in Wilds is the new parry system. Every weapon with a shield can now parry, and even most weapons without a shield still have some kind of counterattack, like the Switch Axe's sword parry, the dual blade and bow's special dodge, and of course the long sword's everything. Much like Rise and specifically Sunbreak, Wilds has a more counter-focused combat system than World. However, this doesn't mean the counters are broken. You don't just press a button and instantly get the results you want, like when you subscribe to a YouTube channel. This is the part where monsters in Wilds, just like in Rise and Sunbreak, have the ability to counter your counters. Check this out, Arkveld has this one attack where he jumps straight at you, but you absolutely should not counter this attack. It's a trap. If you fall for it and counter, you're cooked. This attack has two parts to it. First, there's the charge. Then, right after he charges, he'll quickly turn around and slam his chains down. Arkveld has plenty of attacks like this, and he's not the only one. These force the player to consider the best times to counter, as if they do so recklessly, they'll be heavily punished for it. Ultimately, I agree with the decision to make the weapons easier to learn, and there's one extremely complicated, nuanced, difficult to understand, and intricate reason behind that. I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can with this, but do forgive me if I end up laboring on this point longer than intended. So here goes. It's fun. That's really all there is to it. If they didn't make these changes, I may not have tried Lance, and I know for a fact I would have had far less fun with the game if I didn't. At the end of the day, the older games still exist, and I can and regularly do go back and play them if I want the feeling they provide again. Yet regardless of these changes and how much easier it is to use any given weapon, it's still essential that you focus in all of your hunts. Please don't leave. I think focus mode is brilliant in theory. It's one of those rare additions that's so obvious that it's almost hard to believe we ever played these games without it. It goes hand in hand with another excellent mechanic, the wound system, to create what should be some of the best combat we've ever seen in the series. I'm gonna be pretty harsh on this mechanic, so I'd like to start with the positives because I really do believe that conceptually the idea is fantastic. For a quick refresher, focus mode is this new mechanic that allows you to precisely aim all of your attacks. The wound system is a mix between anomalies from the previous game, Monster Hunter Sunbreak, and tenderizing from Iceborne. When you attack a certain spot on a monster, eventually you'll create a wound, and from here you have two choices. You can either attack it until it naturally breaks, a solid option considering wounds have lowered defense, or you can use a special attack called a focus strike that will destroy the wound, knock the monster down, and deal a fair bit of damage. When a wound is destroyed, there's a bit of cooldown before another one can be created in the same spot. This system pushes the player to be a bit more calculated when attacking the monster. It's no longer just about attacking the head or whatever part takes the most damage. You're instead constantly altering the spot that you attack and even saving your focus strikes for the perfect moment. For example, if you know a monster has a big attack that's tough to avoid, you can intentionally leave a wound unbroken until it starts charging that attack. Then, just as it's about to go off, you focus strike and knock it down. Those moments add a bit of depth to the combat as you end up keeping a mental map of what parts of the monster have been wounded and what parts haven't to create the perfect plan of attack. The system is further expanded in the fact that monsters will create their own wounds that you can take advantage of after large signature moves. One of the most obvious ones is the Railgun Wyvern Rey Dau, who, after discharging a lightning bolt from its head, has to cool off for a second. If you focus strike his head here, it'll act like a wound and you'll get a knockdown. Importantly, these last just the right amount of time to ensure that you can only get them off if you're close enough to the monster when it does these dangerous attacks, effectively rewarding you for playing risky. This is where the in theory part comes in. Focus mode itself is generally fine. You could make an argument that the ability to aim so precisely is too strong, but I think focus mode is in the clear for the most part. The flaws here lie in focus strikes. Simply put, they're just a bit too rewarding. Not in terms of pure numbers, although that does factor into the equation a bit, but more in terms of their utility. Certain monsters get badly stun locked by these, and part of that comes from the fact that focus strikes can cause more wounds that you can then use for more focus strikes. It's a positive feedback loop. The moment that first wound opens up, depending on the monster and the weapon, you might be able to do about 60% or more of the boss's total health before it gets the chance to fight back. This is an especially significant problem on smaller monsters and weapons with more powerful focus strikes. Things like the switch axe can just absolutely bully late game high rank monsters like Blanganga, which takes a lot of the fun out of the hunt. Even without a powerful focus strike like Swax or Greatsword, the combos you get after knocking the monster down from a focus strike can create more wounds too, so this feedback loop exists regardless of the weapon, it's just stronger with some. Thankfully, this is a pretty easy problem to fix. If focus strikes didn't cause more wounds to appear, or if it required multiple focus strikes to knock down a monster, this wouldn't be a problem at all. Gormagala acts as a bit of a proof of concept for this idea since focus strikes don't knock it down immediately, and I imagine it's no coincidence that this is also what many, myself included, consider to be the hardest fight in the game by far. At the end of the day, focus mode feels like the logical conclusion of everything Capcom has been working towards for over a decade. Take a look at the difference between World and the Monster Hunter game just before it, Generations Ultimate. The level of control you have over your character in World is almost night and day when next to GU. Check out the Greatsword. When you start charging this weapon in GU, you can only aim in one direction and slightly alter the placement of the final hit. See that little change in the angle of the swing? Next, take a look at World. Here's the normal swing, and here's the angled one. The difference is near night and day, right? And if we go 2 games ahead to Wilds, we've now got focus mode where you can do a full 360 before you miss your TCS. Now, speaking of the Greatsword's most powerful move, it's no longer the only weapon that can do something like that. Monster Hunter Wilds makes an interesting choice that, much like focus mode, sets the groundwork for what could be the best combat in the series, and it all comes down to what I've been calling an ult-centric design. Practically every weapon in the game has some sort of ultimate attack now, a signature move that effectively concentrates the personality of the entire weapon into one key moment. Take the best weapon in the game, for example, the switch axe. This weapon is all about aggression. Its strongest form is the sword mode, where you utilize this enormous blade that's effectively a mechanical greatsword with the ability to create small explosions at will or on the follow-up of each swing. I'm sorry, why exactly do people play other weapons again? Anyway, this personality is perfectly represented by the Swax's ult. This move sees the hunter brace themselves and begin charging the sword as it glows ever brighter, gathering as much energy as possible until... To add on to this, once the swing begins, you gain super armor, meaning you're actually encouraged to use this attack if you see a chance to trade with the monster. And I'm not sure there's anything quite as Swax coded as seeing this thing and going, yeah, I'll win that trade. Now, despite that being arguably the coolest attack of all time, like I said, every weapon has something like this. Insect Glaive's ult is fundamentally very different from Swax's, despite accomplishing the same goal of do a lot of damage. See, with Insect Glaive, your game plan revolves around 2 things. First, these buffs that you get from your Kinsect. Once you get all of them, your combos change, you get stronger and faster, and even your defense goes up. The second half of the Insect Glaive is its aerial nature. This weapon is the king of the skies, constantly vaulting and flipping through the air to reach places other weapons can't, and to attack in a way that's totally unique to it. Crucially though, there's a bit more thought going on through the head of an Insect Glaive main than that of a Switch Axe main. You can actually get swatted out of the air pretty easily, so despite its free-flowing nature, you can't just recklessly jump at the monster all the time or you'll be punished for it. Naturally then, an ult for this weapon would combine that careful aerial style with the extracts from the Kinsect, and that's exactly what it does. A high damage tornado that sends the hunter flying into the air uses all of their buffs and delivers a series of powerful attacks. This attack even allows your bug to collect some more buffs and lets you go straight into another aerial attack. However, much like the normal aerials, this ult can be interrupted if you're not careful. There's no armor on it at all. Once again, this perfectly synergizes with the rest of the playstyle of the weapon and effectively condenses its personality into one single move. What I love so much about these ults is that they perfectly fit into the profoundly satisfying combat of Monster Hunter. To me, the combat of these games has always been about mastering your weapon in the monster and understanding your attacks and their openings. It's a large part of why I always find myself coming back to Greatsword, because it feels like the perfect representation of that idea. Now though, thanks to this more ult-centric combat, it feels as though every single weapon is awarded that same level of satisfaction, build-up, and release that was once only available to a select few. The ultimate attacks serve another purpose though. They aim to make the combat more cinematic, and there are 3 other mechanics mechanics that help with that. I mentioned this idea of Monster Hunter being great at balancing spectacle with engaging mechanics, and power clashes and offset attacks are the most frequent examples of this. Let's start with... Okay, you know what? Offset attacks. Offset attacks have to be one of the most satisfying mechanics in any game. The feeling of seeing this enormous monster go for some nonsense attack only for you to stand your ground and send it into the stands simply can't be described with words. I swear this has a mini proof of a hero effect where after you land an offset you suddenly start playing 30% better. But why does it feel so good? Well, first, there's the wind-up. Offset attacks are extremely slow. They're not something you can just throw out on reaction. You have to plan well in advance for these. The level of planning and preparation creates anticipation. Next is the moment of impact. The game zooms in, sparks fly, you get this excellent sound, and send the monster flying back. Finally, there's the reward, which just acts as a cherry on top. Importantly, this reward isn't extremely powerful. It shouldn't be. The offset is hard to land, but if every single offset knocked the monster down for an extended period of time, it would be a bit too powerful. You know, like the focus strikes. Sorry, what truly makes the offsets so special though, is that you don't need to use them. They act as the perfect form of risk-reward where the game is effectively challenging you, betting that you can't pull this off, and that's a large part of why it feels so good when you do. Power clashes, on the other hand, act almost like a cutscene in the middle of the fight. They trigger when you perfect guard certain attacks from certain monsters, and they're practically impossible to fail. If we had a scale where one end was a pure gameplay sequence that required precise inputs and planning, while the other end was just a cutscene, power clashes would be somewhere around here. Outside of the perfect guard that's required to activate them in the first place, there's basically no thought that goes into these, it's just button mashing. But I think they're an excellent way to make the fight feel more cinematic, and they're somehow just as exciting 200 hours in as they were on day one. Finally, we've got what I've been calling the Sacred Fall, which helps bring all of this together and show what the developers were trying to do. So in Rise, when you got hit, you had a wire bug that you could use to swing out of harm's way. Wilds introduces something similar. When you get hit, you can whistle for your Sacred, who will come in and pick you up off the ground. I'm not a huge fan of this mechanic at all, but I do understand and respect what they were trying to create. The reason I don't like the Sacred Fall might not be what you think though. Fundamentally, I'm okay with the idea of a mechanic that scoops you off the ground when you get hit. My problem with the Sacred Fall is a lack of consistency. When your Sacred picks you up is based partially on the proximity to you and on the terrain, both of which are entirely random as far as I can tell. Equally random is the direction the Sacred comes from. Sometimes it'll run in from the left or the right and you'll be able to escape in time, but just as likely is the chance for it to run in from a terrible angle and force you to awkwardly turn around to dodge, which often doesn't work. And that's assuming it even shows up in time at all. Now, the positive side of this mechanic is great. It creates this tense scene straight out of a movie where your trusty companion cuts into the action at just the right moment to get you out of harm's way. Furthermore, while they surely could have made the Sacred more robotic and by extension consistent, that also would have made it feel less like a living creature and more like a game mechanic. Whether or not that's a good or a bad thing is going to be up to you. I personally don't like it, but if you do, I think that's totally valid. All of this comes together in the pursuit of one simple goal: make the gameplay feel like you're playing a cutscene. We have never been closer to recreating those opening cinematics that we used to see in older games. You can have an ally get knocked down only for a greatsword user to jump in at the last moment and block the follow-up. You can have a monster jump at you only for you to counter it by swinging so hard you send it flying right back like a scene out of an anime. And regardless of what weapon you're using, you can execute your signature finishing moves as the cameraman does his best to ensure you get the perfect shot to post on your IG later. Behind all of this is an outstanding level of mechanical fidelity that allows the personality of each weapon to shine more than they ever have. The parries for the lance that turn you into an immovable bastion, the counters for the switch axe that ensure you never have to stop your relentless offensive. These allow the weapons to display an even more developed personality than ever before. It creates this gameplay that doesn't simply look outstanding, but feels just as spectacular too. I mentioned a few things in the previous section that alluded to the most controversial part of Monster Hunter Wilds, and I did outright promise to talk about it at the start of that section. So, difficulty in Monster Hunter, as with a lot of games like this, is complicated. Personally, I do not believe the series is suddenly way easier than it was before. The idea that World and all other previous games were challenging, while Rise and Wilds are easy, I find to be, quite frankly, a little silly. There's a trend that's been going on for well over a decade in Monster Hunter. The games have been getting less difficult, and the player has been given more control. For you, introduced mounting, a method by which you could, on demand, get a free knockdown on nearly any monster in the game. Generations introduced hunting styles and arts that gave you super dodges, even more accessible mounts, and anime-esque finishing moves. World World introduced backwards rolling, precise aiming on attacks, moving while healing, heal cancels, sharpening cancels, infinite whetstones, pickaxes and bug nets, traps in the environment, traps that dealt damage in the environment, free heals in the environment, mantles that doubled your HP, increased your elemental resistances, removed knockback from the game while doubling your defense, literally dodged for you. No, this is not a joke. Yes, this is the one people claim is the hard game, and Rise is arguably even less challenging. The point is that Wilds is not Capcom suddenly deciding to make Monster Hunter easier. They've always been making Monster Hunter easier. Focus mode and all of the other changes brought to Wilds are just the next mechanics in a long line of changes made to the series that have made it increasingly less challenging, especially for veterans who have already played at least one of these games before. Ironically enough, one of my biggest problems with World when it released was that it was too easy. I personally wanted it to be harder like Generations or 4 Ultimate, but guess what? When both of those games launched, people said they were too easy. This is just how it works. It's a trend that's been going on for decades at this point, and I'm willing to bet that when the next Monster Hunter game releases, people who started with Wilds will lambast the new game for being too easy and look back longingly at the difficulty in Wilds. The only reason it seems so much more unanimous this time is because this many people played 4U and this many people played World. The overwhelming majority of people hadn't gotten into Monster Hunter when they played and occasionally reviewed World. Now though, they have a previous Monster Hunter game to directly compare this one to, along with all of the experience that comes with that. So with all of that said, does Wilds take this trend, finally reach a breaking point and push things too far? Is Monster Hunter Wilds too easy? Well, this is where we can finally open up that folder from before. First off, the answer is probably yes, but with a massive asterisk next to it. And that's because, to put it simply, Monster Hunter Wilds is unfinished, but not in the way you might think. When it launched, you could only fight Zoshia, the final boss, one time. Furthermore, there was no high rank version of this monster. You could even say that the story ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, as we never really got a detailed explanation of what Zoshia was, nor why it looked and moved like some of the most dangerous elder dragons in the series. The game, despite continuing a trend that's been going on for over a decade, is still a bit too easy. This results in a lot of the mechanics I went over earlier losing a lot of their impact and value as well. Ults, for example, feel less cool when they completely shred the monster before it even gets a chance to fight back. Despite the incredible variety of the monsters in Wilds, the quantity does still matter. There's just a general lack of certain elements, with some weapons only having one single option for elements like Thunder, or even none at all like Blast and Sleep. Finally, as much as I love Jin Dahad, that fight is only one of 2 like it in the game, and at launch it was the only fight like it in the game. We need more large-scale cinematic fights on the level of All-Mother Narwa, Xeno'jiiva, and Geismagorm, yet I can say with near absolute confidence that all of these problems will be addressed with the free title updates. We'll start with difficulty, since that's probably the most concerning one. The question is, how do you make a difficult game when the hunter is so powerful? Well, it's actually pretty easy, because they've literally already done it. As I mentioned at the start, the answer lies in Monster Hunter Rise. I'll mostly discuss endgame Sunbreak here because the examples there are way more clear, but know that they do exist in Rise too, just to a less obvious degree. Let's look at what the hunter in Sunbreak has access to. First, nearly every weapon in the game has a counter, and a lot of those counters are incredibly powerful. That sword counter on Switch Axe in Wilds actually originates from an even stronger version in Sunbreak, a version that would not only counter practically anything a monster could throw at you, but would also deal some of the highest damage of any attack in the game. Most weapons had things like this. Greatsword has a counter that leads directly into TCS, SNS has the classic Shoryugeki that deals tremendous amounts of KO damage, and Dual Blades have this spinning vault that deals damage and gives you extremely generous iframes in the process. Second, every weapon in the game has access to Wirefall. This is a get out of jail free card that lets you, at any moment after getting hit, launch yourself off into another direction while instantly sheathing your weapon too. Third, and finally, we've got super moves. As if the counters weren't powerful enough already, every weapon has multiple super moves that they can access through the use of wire bugs. One of these was a second ZSD that you could use after blasting off the monster from the first one, or just from a standing position. Another, called Axe Hopper, allowed you to use your SAED instantly by launching yourself into the air. And hey, while we're in the air already, let's throw in Dual Blade Spiral Slash, an attack that dealt as much damage, if not more, than a normal Demon Dance, but catapulted you at the monster and could even be used in the air. Yeah, the hunter in Sunbreak was without question the strongest the hunter has ever been. Despite this, I actually found Sunbreak's endgame to be incredibly challenging. Now, I understand why that may be hard to believe considering all the insane abilities I just listed, but it all comes down to the fact that the monsters in Rise Break were actually designed with these abilities in mind. Let me show you an example from an endgame boss. This is Primordial Malzeno. He's one of the most challenging monsters in the game, and a large part of why is because when he goes into his final phase, he starts it with this combo that lasts That was 16 consecutive attacks. Wirefall is limited to how many wire bugs you currently have. One wire bug, one wirefall. Generally speaking, you'll only have 2 or 3 wire bugs at any given moment, which means 2 or 3 wirefalls. That was 16 consecutive attacks. By the end of Sunbreak, Wirefall was no longer a viable get-out-of-jail-free card. In fact, in most of Sunbreak it wasn't, and even in a bit of Rise. Wirefalling carelessly would get you comboed and probably carded rather quickly in the late game, since while this mechanic does offer plenty of evasion, it instantly removes your iframes the moment you use it. We can see this in base game Rise 2 with the F-16 fighter jet that will swing multiple times in a row. If you Wirefall the first swing, you'll get hit and likely carded by the second. Each counter, much like Wirefalls, requires a certain amount of wire bugs. Swax's, for example, uses 2. So sure, go ahead, counter the first hit. What are you gonna do about the next 15 of them? The special moves as well use wire bugs, and you only have 2 or 3 of these. So if you had already used 1 or 2 of your special moves before, and you don't have a third wire bug, you don't even get the chance to Wirefall. Now, that's not to say you can't dance around this unreal string of attacks with certain weapons and setups, and when you do, it's unlike anything else in the series. But crucially, it requires skill, timing, and practice. You're not some superhuman just casually running circles around the boss. Both you and the monster have movesets and tools that complement each other. It's because of this that the monsters still feel threatening despite the overwhelmingly powerful mechanics at your disposal. The Hunter in Risebreak is far stronger than the one in Wilds, yet Risebreak was still plenty difficult by the end thanks to the title updates and of course the eventual expansion. Now, I'm not claiming that every single title update will be Primordial Malzeno, but what I am saying is that the game have had more powerful hunters with higher levels of difficulty. The two are not mutually exclusive. I would bet on the possibility of monsters being so difficult they almost require more tactical use of Sacred Falls, counters, ults, focus mode, and focus strikes. In fact, we already have monsters in Wilds that come close to this idea, like the previously mentioned Gormagala and Arkveld. Next, we can look at variety, and I mean, come on, this one's obvious. I guess we can look back if you want. World launched with these monsters, the title updates added these, Rise launched with these are we really doing this? Yes, there will be more monsters added in the title updates, and by extension, variety. We've even got Lagiacrus confirmed to be coming back, so that should solve the problem of Fulgur Anjanath being the only Thunder option for a few weapons. Finally, let's talk cinema. Once again, we can simply look at the past for a hint of what'll likely come in the future. Monster Hunter World launched with just 2 cinematic hunts, as I'll call them, Xeno'jiiva and Zora Magdaros. With the updates, we got Behemoth and Kulve Taroth, 2 hunts that felt clearly and distinctly different from everything else in the game. Were they good? I'll let you make that call. Regardless, looking at Wilds as of Title Update 1, we now have 2 cinematic hunts in the game, Zoshia and Jin Dahad. So again, if things repeat the way they did last time, we can expect to see 1 or maybe even 2 more cinematic hunts. Before we part ways, allow me to leave you with this. The reason I'm so unconcerned with Wilds at the moment is not due to a level of blind faith or optimism. It's not because I'm a fan of the series or because I'm desperate to see it succeed. It is instead based on the numerous patterns we've seen multiple times in the past. When it's all said and done, Wilds may have the most varied roster with an average size, perhaps the best combat, multiple extremely high quality cinematic hunts like Jin Dahad, Zoshia, and potentially 1 or 2 more, and the best story we've ever seen in any of these games. While it is entirely possible that Wilds ends up as a shadow of what it could have been, and believe me, I will be there to critique it if it does, I truly do believe that it has the potential to be the greatest of all time, even if, as of the writing of this script, it's not there just yet.